On the paper you have in front of you, I want you to write down 5 attributes that are essential to who you are. They don't need to be things you would put on a resume or confess. Just things that speak to your identity. Mother, brother, water polo player, artist, Californian, senior, student. Come up with 5 things. If you absolutely need 6, you can write down 6. But you need 5. I'll give you about another 15 seconds. So I'm starting to see heads, but I know some of you are still working. You don't need to think too hard. Raise your hand if you have all 5. Do you have at least 4? 7's great. Okay, now what I want you to do is you can fold your paper or cover up so you're only looking at number 3 on your list. Got that? Now imagine, what if the rest of the world only saw you as number 3? If you were to describe someone else using only number 3, would that person look anything like you? There would be no number 1, no number 2, no number 4 or 5 or 6, 7. How would you feel if people only thought of you as number 3? It might not be a bad thing. It might be a very good thing. But it still wouldn't give a complete picture, would it? If someone only knew you as number 3, they wouldn't really know you at all. Children run into this a lot if they're at the grocery store and bump into their teacher. They suddenly become shy and can't seem to speak. That same person who they babbled all day to, now they act like they're a stranger. Or they're in shock. Because, wait, you don't live at the school? They let you out? I heard a story, and to be honest, I can't remember who told me, so if it was one of you, please forgive me, about somebody who ran into their pastor at a county fair. And the pastor was wearing a Hawaiian shirt and shorts and sandals and with some friends and came up to talk to them. And this person took a few minutes to register who this familiar looking person was, because it was the first time they hadn't seen him with a clerical collar. I think this is maybe why sometimes our society society seems so fascinated with celebrity sightings. We're so used to seeing people up on the large screen or on the stage that it's amazing to see them as real, actual people who walk down the street and drink coffee. We tend to compartmentalize one another. And when someone doesn't fit into our box, or the compartment that we've created for them, we can be left feeling a little uneasy or unsettled. Our boats are getting rocked a little. Well, there's some boat rocking that happens in our scripture today. The writer of Luke addresses this gospel to Theophilus, which means lover of God. This might be one particular individual, but it also might just mean any Christian. I hope that most or all of us here are lovers of God, so I imagine that this might include us here today. The author intended that this gospel be read aloud in homes where followers of Christ were gathered for sharing in the Lord's Supper. And they wanted it to explain what happened and what it means. Just before where we begin reading in chapter 7, Jesus had been preaching and teaching to love our enemies, to do good to those who hate us, and do not judge. And so now, Jesus has the opportunity to practice what he had been preaching. So he enters a town where lives a man who works as a centurion. In the Roman military, a centurion had about 100 men under him. And at that time, the Romans, especially the Roman soldiers, were often viewed by the Jewish people as enemies because they were occupying their territory. And they were instilling and enforcing laws and curfews and other regulations and customs that the Jewish people wanted absolutely nothing to do with. There was also Jewish law that said that Jewish people should not be associating or visiting with Gentiles. A Gentile is any non-Jew, which includes a Roman. This is a law that Jesus often disregarded. Well, centurions seemed to have a choice. They could rule with an iron fist, instilling fear in the local residents, or they could share imperial resources and trade them with the local villagers. This particular man who worked as a centurion chose the latter. And he worked to help build a synagogue in that village. He also had a slave or a servant who he cared for very much, who happened to be very sick, possibly dying. This centurion had heard about Jesus and trusted him and acted out his faith by sending a request that Jesus heal his servant. Now, Jesus could have just looked at number 3 on the centurion's list and seen centurion and said, nope, not going to touch that one. Jesus could have looked at number 2 and seen Gentile/Roman and said, it's against the law. Sorry, better luck next time. Jesus could have looked at number 4 with the blinders that we often wear and just thought enemy and laughed at the very idea of helping him. But Jesus knew there was much more to this person than a few items on a list. Jesus knew that this Gentile, who had probably grown up worshiping other gods, who was occupying Jewish land, who was unwanted, unwelcome, and an outsider, was above all, first and foremost, a child of God. There was so much more to this man than his job, than how he worshiped, than where he was from. He was kind to those in the village where he was stationed. He cared about, loved even, this servant enough to ask for help. And he had such faith in Jesus that he believed Jesus need only say a word and a miracle would happen. So as we, lovers of God, followers of Christ, are gathered in this house of God, this home to God's people, where we will share in the Lord's Supper in a little bit, reading the Gospel of Luke, we learn that what happened was that there was a man who could justifiably be thought of as an enemy, who reached out to Jesus asking for help. And Jesus saw that this man was not an enemy at all, but a child of God. And we learn that what it means for us is that God shows up and surprises us in places and in people we would never expect. And just as Paul wrote in his letter to the Galatians, there will be people who will try to confuse us and lead us astray and pervert the gospel, teaching us that we need to label everyone, including ourselves, and that if some of those labels we don't quite understand, that we should fear them. But we must instead hold on to what Jesus has shown us. That no amount of labels can really share who we really are. There is so much more to each of us than anything on your list. And that we cannot truly live out Jesus' command to love one another if we're busy looking at labels. So now what I want you to do is take your paper again, and over it all, write child of God, big, bold. It doesn't need to cover up what you wrote, but it needs to be on top of it. This is who we are and whose we are. We are saints and we are sinners. We have fallen short, but we have been chosen and redeemed and loved. When you look in the mirror and when you look around at each person, you can go ahead and put your new label on. Because this is the only label that matters. Amen. Amen.